In this video, I'll show you how to make a wall cabinet. Is the back, and the back needs to be 9.5 inches wide. Now, using the tri-square, we make sure that we have a perpendicular line, line it up, and it will measure in this direction 9.5 inches, and in this direction it will be 11 1/4. When it comes time to cutting on the table saw, we want to lower the blade to a height that's good for our needs. If there's a piece of wood that's been left, we simply use a piece of scrap wood to remove that piece. So I'm going to cut a second time and trim it right on the outside of that line. Back part, we need to cut the two sides. The two sides will be 3 1/8 by 11 1/4 in length. Now we're going to cut the two sides. The two sides each need to be cut at 11 1/4. 11 1/4. There we have it. 11 1/4 out the wood. So that we'll end up with a much more accurate piece if we measure it after we make the first cut. Let's go cut this piece in. Great! Now we've got our two side pieces. Let's work on the top piece. Alright, here are the two side pieces. Both of them measure 3 1/8 inch wide and 11 1/4 inches long. Alright, we're moving right along. The next part we need to cut is our top. The top has to be exactly 11 inches. So we'll mark it here at 11. And it's a great habit to get into, always drawing your lines with a tri-square or a carpenter square. You just can't beat the accuracy you get. You know. Great, now we've got our top. It measures 11 inches by 3 1/8 inches wide. Now we can put it all together. When it's put together, it'll look pretty much like this. Of course, we've got our top, our two sides, and the back. We're about halfway done. To put it together more easily, it's often nice to have a second set of hands or a vise. So in this case, we'll put it in the bench vise. Put it up here, lock it in place. It doesn't have to be extremely tight, but secure is great. We apply some glue to the edge. We're going to glue and nail it. Apply this glue here. The glue is actually going to do most of the holding for us once it dries. But to hold it in place until it gets there, we're going to use some finish nails. Now, finish nails are quite nice in the sense that they have a small head. That little head, you can actually drive it down deeper into the surface and sand it and fill it with glue and sawdust, and you'll really never see that head once it's buried into the wood. So, to make it easier though, we're going to pre-nail our project. One nail right about here, just so it's barely coming out the other side. You see it just starting to peek through? That's where we want the nail, just coming through that other side. Do the same down here on the other side. If it starts to go crooked, no problem. That's why we've got a claw on the back of the hammer. We can take this claw, hook it in, and remove the nail if it's bent. Don't try to keep on hammering if you find that it's bending over. Just pull it out and start over. Now, if you ever find you have to hammer into a knot, that can actually be pretty hard. You might, if you can, want to avoid going into a knot, and you want to try to hammer on either side of it, or if you must, pre-drill the hole so you can go in without splitting the wood or bending the nail. It's just like trying to drive a nail into a rock when you're trying to hammer into a knot. That's tough work. All right. Line up our board on top of the back, making sure it's nice and flush and even on the sides, making sure the top and bottom are flush as well. Hold it with one hand. Drive those nails home. It's just that easy. This is called a nail set. And a nail set, or a nail punch, is designed to be set on top of a nail and to drive that nail home. About 1/8 of an inch is just fine. Just enough to get it below the surface. Let's do that to here as well. This nail. A little more. Now, these holes we can sand later, mix some glue in there and sand it, and you'll probably never notice those nails there. Now we turn it over, apply the glue, and now let's drive home that nail and set it that way. And we're ready to put the top on. The top is going to fit just like that. And we're going to need 3 nails for it. 1 nail here on this end, 1 nail in the center in the back, and 1 nail here on the side. And there we have it. Our back, our sides, our top is in place. Let's work on the bottom part. Now we're going to cut the bottom. The bottom part needs to be 11 inches. So we'll do our little mark. We'll take our trusty carpenter square and we mark it at 11 inches. All right, here's our bottom piece. I'll identify it and I'll mark it. Bottom. And let's drive our nails in. We need 1 here, 1 at the back, and 1 at the other side. Now, before we put this on, it's really nice if we can round these outer edges here. We'll just round this one on the disc sander here, and we'll round this one that's going to be facing out as well. So we're going to just round 2. We're going to round this corner here, and we're going to round that corner there. The backs will remain just like you see them. Now, when we're about to use this disc sander, there are a couple rules you want to remember. You always want to sand on the downward side. You don't want to sand on the side that's spinning up. If you spin on the upward side, the piece of wood could get lifted or flicked out of your hands, as well as your face getting sprayed with a stream of sawdust, which never is pleasant by anyone's standards. So we're going to want to be sanding on the downward side, on the side going down. Also, make sure the vacuum of whatever sort your shop has is on, because if the vacuum is on, it helps pull out the dust that would normally be blown into the air. And as always, we want to make sure we have our safety gear. Now that we've got our corners rounded, let's put in our finish nails to hold it in place. 1 in the back, 1 on each side. Hey, we're more than halfway done now. We just need our doors, the top arch, and the top adornment. And we'll be ready to sand and finish. Just have a few more parts to make. We need to make the top section and this front arch right here, the decorative arch. Now you can kind of customize these. I've seen these made differently. Maybe some student will put a heart here instead, or a star, what have you. So you can customize this part if you choose. But yeah, I'm going to show you how to do this part and this part. To do so, you simply need a piece of wood that's 3 1/8 inches wide and 11 inches long. I'll write this down here so you visually can see it. In this direction, it needs to be 3 1/8, just like your sides were. And lengthwise, you want to cut it exactly 11 inches. So you've got 11 inches in length, 3 1/8 inches wide. Your teacher will probably have a pattern. Doesn't have to necessarily be green. In this case, I have made a green one. It's easy to find around the shop because of its bright color. Line it up right here, and kind of trace it. Now I'm going to go to the scroll saw, cut it out. Using the scroll saw, we can cut out this section here, and we'll want to save both parts. This will be used for the top of the project. This will be used for the front, for the arch. As always, remember, please wear your safety gear, goggles, and ear protection if you have the ear protection. Now, using the disc sander, we can smooth out some of these edges on the top piece so it gives a more attractive appearance. That's better. Now, using some hand sandpaper, we can sand around these edges, or if your class or your shop has a drum wheel, sanding wheel, we can use the drum sander to sand out this arch. That's a lot nicer. Now we can glue and nail the top arch to the top of our project. Apply a thin bit of glue. Set in the arch. Align the piece. And with our nail set, we'll drive home the nails so that you can't see the heads of the nails. Now we just need to glue on the top. This piece does better if you just glue it and don't nail it. If you nail, it tends to split. It's so small. And if we glue it, in a matter of 15 minutes, it's pretty secure. I'm going to make sure it's even from side to side. Let's just let it sit for a while. Now, just on a piece of scrap wood, I made a little piece that measures about 3 inches long. I just sketched it out. Yours can be any shape. Basically, I'll show you after I cut this out. This part will be to keep the doors from going too far. I also, with the old trick of making a paper heart, I just made a little pattern, and this little pattern is what I will use to make the door handles. So I've got the door stop and 2 handles that I'll be using for the front of the project. Now I'm going to cut out on the scroll saw these 2 hearts and the door stop. Let's clean these up on the disc sander. This piece is going to be our door stop right here in the center. Apply a little glue, smear it along, and just place it right there in the middle. About 15 minutes, that'll be pretty strong. Now we need to cut a piece for the doors, 12 inches long. Make sure you use the tri-square to ensure a square cut. So this piece will be 12 inches in this direction. Inches long. We'll cut it on the table saw. Now we'll cut it on the table saw. When you do this, make sure that the fence has been pulled far away so there's no interference or chance of binding. There we have it. A nice cut right on the line. Now when we bring it back, we can see if we line up this side here, when we come around at this other side, we can see it's about 1/4 inch too long. The door only needs to be 11 inches wide. So let's make a mark here at 11 inches. And here's our 11-inch mark. I'm going to show you a little trick that comes in handy a lot. You can measure this with a ruler or the tri-square, but in this one instance, this is a time when you can use this little trick. Take your finger, rest it tightly against the tip of the pencil, and set that pencil there right at that mark you need to mark. Guide your finger along the edge of the wood, and you'll have a straight line from which you can follow. Now to make this cut, we're going to use the bandsaw to make this cut, because the table saw is really not set up to make a rip cut using a cross-cut guide. So we're going to make this cut on the bandsaw. Alright, we're here at the bandsaw. Let's make the cut. Save this piece. We're going to need it for later. Now we're ready to cut the door shape out. Now it's a bit of a tricky cut because we've got to contend with this unique arch at the top. If we put this right here, there's really not much help unless we had a tiny person inside who could trace the outside of the line, which we don't, at least not I'm aware of. But we do have this pattern that we use to cut out this piece here. So if we set this piece right here on top of the cabinet, then we take that same piece we had here, we line it up at the top of our project, even it side to side, top to top, and that looks pretty good. Now we cut out this part here. This part should fit pretty nicely inside the opening. Let's go to the scroll saw and cut this part out. All right, I've worked a while, got it prepared. It took me a while to sand, cut, test it, but let's see how it fits now. That's a pretty good fit. It's going to be natural that you're going to have some openings, but I'm going to show you a little trick on how to minimize how that affects your project. 5.5 is the center line for this door, which I've already marked using the tri-square as a straight edge. I've got it marked. Now I'm going to go to the bandsaw and cut this as straight as I can. Now I'm going to go to the bandsaw, cut this as straight as I can. There we have our two halves. I'm going to smooth out these edges a bit on the belt sander here. This one's better. This one's better too. Now I'm going to go to the router table and round over some of the front edges of these doors. We'll give it a more finished look. I'm going to only round the inner edges and the outer edges. The rest I'm going to do with a file. If you have a vacuum for your router table, make sure you turn it on at the same time you're using the router, because this machine can generate a lot of dust. Also, be very careful to keep your fingers far away from the cutting edge right there in the bit. It's very sharp and it'll do a number on your fingers. It's extremely important you try to stay as far away as possible from that router table. Now I'm going to go to the router table and round over some of the front edges of these doors. We'll give it a more finished look. I'm going to only round the inner edges and the outer edges. The rest I'm going to do with a file. If you have a vacuum for your router table, make sure you turn it on at the same time you're using the router, because this machine can generate a lot of dust. Also, be very careful to keep your fingers far away from the cutting edge right there in the bit. It's very sharp and it'll do a number on your fingers. It's extremely important you try to stay as far away as possible from that router table. Now we can router the tops and the bottoms of the doors using the handheld router. Now, these are too small to router being only holding them with your hand. That would be dangerous. So we're going to secure them using the wooden C-clamps so their profiles sticking out from the table. Now your instructor may have a different trick or different technique or machine for doing this, but this is how we're going to do it at this time with a handheld router clamped to the tabletop. Make sure you wear your eye and ear protection, as this machine does generate a lot of noise and dust. Now the door's front edges are completely routed. Gives it a nice finished look. I was going to show you a trick to minimize the gap at the top. So let's use that same router to router around the top from here, this point, up and over the arc, and stopping right there. That looks pretty good. Now it's time to sand the project. One thing that's really important that you're aware of is if you're using a random orbital sander, please, by all means, make sure you actually do have a piece of sandpaper on the bottom. If you come to the sander and you think this is the sandpaper, check with your teacher to make sure it really does have sandpaper. Because for instance, this is not the sandpaper, this is the Velcro. If you try to sand with this just like that on the project, it'll just damage the whole surface and that whole part will have to be replaced. And it's a lot of work and a lot of money to replace it. So please make sure before starting any sanding with a random orbital sander that it does in fact have a piece of sandpaper, preferably a fresh one, that's on it. Otherwise you'll end up damaging the machine. Now we're about ready to put the doors hinges on. We can see that the doors fit pretty well. There's a nice fit here. But through past experience, I found that when you open these doors, they tend to bind right here. So I would highly recommend filing and knocking down that edge just from about here to about there with a file. And the same on this side. When you open it, you're going to notice it's going to clip in the back right there. So we're going to file them briefly and get them cut down on those sections. These doors look pretty good now. I'd say we're on the final stages where we're going to put the hinges in. And you can test your door by holding it and pivoting it on that pivot point right here on the edge. And if it's free and it's not clipping anything, you're probably good to go with the hinges. However, if you try to do that and you just can't get it to go because it's clipping right there, instead of putting the hinges on, first figure out why it's hitting there and get that fixed, so it'll save you some time. It's not the end of the world to put it on, but it'll just save you time if you figure out where it's hitting before you can put the hinges on. Wow, we're making great time. Here comes the part that's probably the most rewarding, and it can be a little challenging, but it's not hard actually. We're going to be putting the doors on using something called a hinge. You may have seen these much bigger ones on actual doors. A lot of times they'll have 3 or 2 depending on the weight and width of the door. But we're going to be using 2 of these, 2 hinges per door. So we'll need 4 altogether of these hinges. These are brass and they have them steel and copper, all sorts of different finishes. This is called the barrel right here. This is called the barrel. And basically, half of it's going to be installed on the body and half will be on the door. And as it pivots, the door will swing open back and forth. We don't want to put it right there at the very edge of it. However, we also don't want them at the very center either, because that would lead to weaknesses. So we want to put them both about the body of a hinge down this way, and we want to put it about a body of a hinge up this way. So this is kind of where we want to do it, right about here and right about there. But we're going to start first with our door. Now it can be kind of tricky to try to put everything all together at once. So let's take the door, secure it in a vise. Got it here in a vise. And we're gonna go ahead and put these pieces in. So this first part, let's mark it. So we want that with the barrel about midway in. I'm going to make a circle. A circle here. That shows where the screws are going to go. We're going to do the same at the top. We're going to mark down the length of a leaf of the hinge. And we're going to mark the circles. There we've got the circles marked. And we're going to take a scratch awl. Scratch awl here has a nice little point, and that point will create a starter hole for these screws. It just makes it a little easier to get the screw in. So I'll put in give it a gentle tap. We don't want to slam it. If we slam it, good chance you're gonna split the wood. So we just want to give it a tap and a tap. Come over here, tap it as well. Now the reason we want to use screws and not a nail, is it has more holding power. It's quite a bit more holding power because of these threads. Now this is a Phillips head screw, unlike a slot, which would be just a line. So we'll need a Phillips head screwdriver. Here's an example how you can test to see if your hinges are going to work or not. I've only put the hinges in on the door, but not on the body of the cabinet yet. And I'm going to hold it here on the body, and I'm going to try to turn it and lift it. As I do, I am noticing it is catching right here. There's a bit of a, let's see, but a catch right there. So prior to putting the hinges on all the way, I'm going to sand this or file this a bit more to make sure the door will fit before I put on the hinges, because the last thing I want to do is have all the hinges on and I've seen it, the door just won't open. It'll either break the hinge, split the wood, but it won't open. So prior to that, let's see if we can get it custom fit. All right, I've worked on it, and I can tell that this door opens and closes pretty nicely, although it did take a bit of filing and adjusting on the back side of here in order for it to do it. But now I'm ready to install the hinges. To do that, I'm going to hold these hinges where I'd like them to be. I'm going to mark them with a pencil. Then with the scratch-all, I'm going to make some starter holes. All right, let's finish that screw in. We have all our screws attached to the hinges. Let's see how it looks. All right, this door looks great. Let's go on to the next side. We'll do it the same way we did the other door. Well, we've got both doors installed. The one thing you'll notice though, if you don't have door knobs, it makes it a little hard to open. So we're going to go ahead and glue on these handles that we made, and we want to make sure they're at the same height. So we're just going to use our carpenter square to do that. You can put them wherever you like. I think they look better right about here. To attach them, all we're going to need is a dab of glue. I think that side looks a little nicer. Right there. And a little dab of glue right there. Try and make sure they're balanced. Once that glue sets up, it's kind of hard to change it. All right, we'll let these sit for about 15 minutes, and I'll show you how to do the last little piece. We're almost done. The last piece is this part right here. And it's going to go halfway on the inside. It's sort of a seal. And now for the final piece. Doors work well. That's nice. You remember that little part that comes in here that sort of is a seal? Well, that part we just After glue it on, it's quite easy. Let me get some glue. Little application of glue. Put that there. Put something under it to make sure that it doesn't fall off. And in about 15-20 minutes, it will be secure. Do, however, make sure that when it closes, it does not hit that part right there. Let's do a double check. Yep, it's clear. It's not hitting at the top. That looks great. Let's let it dry for about 15 minutes. Well, here's the finished cabinet. I think it turned out pretty well. It took a while to make, as you saw, but when you're finished, you have a nice little project that I think you'll enjoy taking.